In the last couple of videos that I've made, I've been talking about what I'm referring to as phenomenal space, which is the space of subjective being, and how the facts of our embodiment bring with them an intuitive understanding of that space. So in the past I've talked about the kind of physics of, if you like, of a space, or the experience of a space, which contains things like perspectival shortening, or contains differences due to the fact that we operate within a space that has gravity flowing through it, apparently. So I've been talking about that. This space has particular characteristics that flow from the nature of our embodiment and from the environment in which that embodiment comes together. That's what I've been talking about so far. What I want to move into now is just a consideration of some of the other kinds of spaces which I think informs our existence, if you like, which our sensory motor system is both engaged with and is in the process of constructing. And how, what I want to go with that, obviously, is to talk about how that construal of space, or those different construals of space, may, as I said, form templates for construing different kinds of abstract information, particularly thoughts, knowledge, desires, feelings, those kinds of things. In other words, how meaning maps onto different understandings of space, alongside the things I've already talked about to do with objects and perceptions. Okay, I'll be reading some of this, so it is what it is. Okay, in the appendix to his book on relativity theory, the physicist David Bohm addressed some of the issues around perception that come out of the ideas in his book. Part of this concerns the relationship between perception and space, and how the ability to occupy different positions in space changes the nature of perception and the objects that such perception embraces. He gives the example of seeing an ellipse, perhaps the ellipse formed by looking at the top of a coffee cup as it's held in the hand prior to drinking from it. Even though the visual image presented to the organ of sense, the eye, is the ellipse, it's not seen as such. Perception seamlessly interprets the top of the cup as circular, even though we at no point see this circle in its most essential form. If we did, we would have a lapful of coffee. The process at work here is that the visual sensory motor system responsible for engaging with the top of the cup is not stationary, fixing its gaze unswervingly on that object. Instead, it is an eye in motion, even if that motion is relatively slight, and each motion of the eye, the head, the hand, and the arm change the orientation of the cup to our eye, and simultaneously changes the shape of the ellipse in lockstep with this motion. Extrapolating from this constantly changing but systematically related data, the perception of the top of the cup is made up not from a single view-pointed image, but of this extrapolation, the circle we rarely see. This process points up an understanding of space which is not only egocentrically oriented around the axis of the unmoving situated body. The space that Bohm indicates is one in which our ability to move and to quite literally see things from different angles is taken into account. In this space there is no inevitable perspectivalism, and the railway tracks which lead off toward the horizon are seen as the parallel lines that they surely are. This is the scientific method in miniature, in which the evidence of the senses are peer-reviewed by those same senses, but from other places and at other times. There is also another space, perhaps an extension of the last, which arises from our being in a world shared by other beings with similar senses. The space that I occupy is also entertained by you and by others, and the number of eyes which look out onto this space multiply accordingly. Experiencing this space involves social processes and the sharing of sense through interpersonal and extrapersonal means. This is the kind of sense which one gains from learning and becoming informed. It is common sense because it is held in common, available not only to one individual through the intuitive sense of their subjective embodiment, but to anyone who cares to learn. The common sense alluded to here, whilst it may offer a viewpoint on the universe which seems, to some at least, arbitrary, gyratory, and lacking the privilege of centeredness, is also a sense which places our eyes everywhere, and gives us what Thomas Nagel paradoxically referred to as the view from nowhere. In the vast incomprehensibility of space, there is not a single place anywhere that one cannot conceive oneself as occupying, and the totality of one's image of the universe is a collation of all these possible viewing positions. Okay, I just want to reiterate what I'm saying there, because I'm not quite sure if I expressed it clearly. What I'm indicating in that section is that there are, in addition to the phenomenal space, highly subjective, highly viewpointed, highly perspectival space that I talked about before, we do also have access to a space which is not centered on a particular viewpoint, which is not located inside the head, so to speak, but is distributed slightly. There's a space, the one that that Bohm refers to, the space of our own experience, in where, as we move around objects, we're constantly getting different viewpoints of those objects. I'm talking visually now specifically, but it does apply to other senses. We get different viewpoints, and all the time that we're doing that, our cognitive processes are collating that information and imagining this view, putting together this view from all around the object. And in addition to that, not only are that, but because we're social beings, we share our viewpoints with other people. Eve Sweetser talks about this when she's talking about the use of deixis in language, where she talks about the fact that that we can imagine what other people are seeing. When we see a person in the street, it's quite easy to imagine what their viewpoint would be. And when a person's talking to us, we can kind of imagine what we look like to them, and we might be very concerned about that. So, as well as occupying our own viewing position, we're also imaginatively occupying a number of viewing positions simultaneously. And the perspectivalism of a unique individual space is lost in that distribution. So we're able to get a more multivalent, multi-ocular understanding of space. I hope that's slightly clear. It seems likely, therefore, that we are creatures who simultaneously inhabit not one space, but several. There is the space of subjectivity and self-centeredness, in which the world radiates out from one's body, diminishing with distance in both size and importance until it disappears over the horizon. And there is the space of experience which presents the world to us in the different ways available to mobile animals. And then there is the space of objectivity. I'm going to come back to that term later. There is the space of objectivity in which we occupy all the centres of the universe at once, and the peripheral horizon disappears. The first space is our birthright, the product of our animal embodiment and our embeddedness in the environment. The second we earn through motion and exploration. The third is our newfound land, the result of the gradual enlightenment of our species and the vision admitted by that light. When Premack and Adams draw attention to the potential for existential anomie afforded by the internalization of Newton's impersonal space, I should just reiterate on that. What I mentioned in a video before last, I think, is that Premack and Adams, in a book called View from the Center of the Universe, describe a certain kind of scientific worldview, or an understanding of space, basically the space that Newton described, as being decentered, impersonal, just kind of background space with no particular location for humans within it. And they suggested there's a kind of existential lostness attached to that understanding of space, which perhaps didn't exist in older Earth-centered understanding of space. So when Premack and Adams draw attention to the potential for this existential anomie afforded by the internalization of Newton's impersonal space, they are reminding us that such learning is not only the acquisition of rational disembodied facts. They recognize that the images we hold of space on the grandest scale possible are also constructive of the fabric of our understanding. The intuition that comes with subjective embodiment is joined by other intuitions, which may at times be at odds with the first. Each of these spaces is at work in our cognition, and each is active in our intuitions. Each appears unbidden and often invisible in the poetics of our language, and each space is used to contain the ideas and objects of our experience, the stuff and the meaning of thought. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it today. Thanks very much for watching.